exactly where she'd promised not to be. Simone moved like she was auditioning for something, hips swaying to the rhythm, arms raised above her head, completely lost in the music. Nothing unusual there. My wife had always been a dancer, and I'd fallen for that graceful confidence years ago when we first met at a real estate conference in Boston. But tonight, she wasn't dancing alone. The stranger was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of gym-sculpted build that screamed personal trainer or supplement salesman. His black shirt stretched tight across his chest, and his hands rested on Simone's waist with the familiarity of someone who'd done this before. I stopped walking. The drinks grew heavy in my hands. They moved together like choreographed partners, her back pressed against his chest, his mouth close to her ear. The crowd parted around them, giving them space, as if everyone else could sense the electricity crackling between their bodies. My wife threw her head back and laughed at something he whispered. The sound cut through the music and the chatter and hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't heard her laugh like that, genuine, uninhibited, joyful, in months. The stranger spun her around, and for a moment, Simone faced my direction. Our eyes should have met across the crowded floor. She should have seen me standing there with her drink, should have waved me over, or at least acknowledged my presence. Instead, she smiled up at her dance partner like he was the only person in the room. I watched her reach into her small purse, the black clutch I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. Her phone emerged, sleek and silver in the pulsing lights. She held it out to him, and he took it with practiced ease, his thumbs moving across the screen. He was entering his number. She was giving him her contact information. My wife was exchanging phone numbers with a stranger while I stood 20 feet away, holding her drink like some kind of cocktail waiter. The rationale part of my brain, the part that measured twice and cut once, that calculated load-bearing requirements and stress tolerances, tried to find an innocent explanation. Maybe he was a potential client. Maybe they were discussing business. Maybe this was all perfectly innocent networking disguised as dancing. But the way his hand lingered on the small of her back as he returned her phone told a different story. The way she bit her lower lip and nodded at whatever he said next confirmed what I already knew in my gut. This wasn't business. This wasn't innocent. This was my wife of 8 years flirting with another man while I fetched her drinks like an obedient servant. I stood there for another 30 seconds, watching them move together, watching her face light up with an animation I rarely saw at home anymore. The whiskey in my hand suddenly smelled too strong, and the vodka tonic seemed like a waste of perfectly good alcohol. The smart thing would have been to march over there, tap the stranger on the shoulder, and remind my wife that she'd come here with her husband. The confrontational thing would have been to dump both drinks on their heads and demand an explanation in front of everyone. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I turned around and walked away. Not stormed, not stomped. Just walked, calm and deliberate. Back through the crowd toward the exit. I set both drinks on the bar as I passed, nodding to the bartender who looked confused by my sudden donation. "Everything okay, man?" he asked. "Everything's perfect," I replied, and meant it in the strangest way possible. The cool October air hit my face as I pushed through the club's front doors. Terrence Voss, the doorman who'd checked our IDs an hour earlier, gave me a questioning look. "Leaving already? Thought you just got here." "Change of plans," I said, fishing my car keys from my pocket. "My wife's having too much fun to leave." Terrence chuckled, not catching the edge in my voice. "Lucky her. Drive safe, mister. Blackwood." The drive home took exactly 12 minutes, long enough for the shock to wear off and the clarity to set in. I didn't speed. I didn't punch the steering wheel or shout at the radio. Instead, I found myself thinking about structural integrity. Every building needs a solid foundation. When that foundation shifts or cracks, you have two choices: repair it or tear it down and start over. But sometimes the damage goes too deep, compromises too much of the structure. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is acknowledge that the building is no longer safe to inhabit. Our house sat on Maple Street, a modest but well-maintained colonial that we'd bought 3 years ago. I'd renovated most of it myself. New kitchen, updated bathrooms, refinished hardwood floors. Every room contained hours of my labor, pieces of my sweat and attention. Tonight, it felt like someone else's home. I parked in the driveway and sat in the truck for a moment, looking at the windows glowing warm and yellow in the darkness. Inside, everything waited exactly as we'd left it. Simone's coffee mug from this morning still sat in the sink. Her real estate magazines were scattered across the kitchen table. Her favorite throw blanket lay draped over the couch where she'd been reading before we left for the club. Evidence of a life we'd built together. Evidence of a marriage I'd thought was solid. I unlocked the front door and climbed the stairs to our bedroom. The closet door stood open, revealing Simone's extensive wardrobe organized by color and season. She took pride in her appearance, always had. As a real estate agent, she understood that image mattered, that people bought from someone who looked successful. I pulled her largest suitcase from the top shelf and laid it open on the bed. Packing someone else's belongings is an intimate act of disconnection. I folded her clothes with the same care she would have used, dresses hung properly, delicate items wrapped in tissue paper, shoes paired and protected. This wasn't anger driving my hands. This was something colder and more final. Her jewelry box sat on the dresser, filled with pieces I'd given her over the years. Anniversary earrings, birthday necklaces, the diamond engagement ring she'd worn for 2 years before we married. I left it all untouched. Those gifts belonged to a different version of us, a version that had existed before tonight. The suitcase filled quickly. 8 years of marriage condensed into 50 pounds of fabric and accessories. I zipped it closed and carried it downstairs, setting it gently on the front porch beside the door. Back inside, I walked to the kitchen and opened the drawer where we kept important papers. Our mortgage documents, insurance policies, bank statements. All the bureaucratic evidence of our shared life. Simone's name appeared on most of them, but I'd been the one making the payments, managing the accounts, keeping our financial ship steady while she focused on building her career. I found what I was looking for in the back of the drawer, the paperwork from when we'd installed the smart lock system last spring. Simone had wanted the convenience of keyless entry, the ability to let clients into houses without physical keys. I'd installed it myself, programmed both our phones, set up the backup codes. Tonight, I deleted her access. The process took less than 5 minutes. A few taps on my phone, a new code entered into the system, and suddenly Simone's key would no longer open our front door. The house would no longer recognize her as an authorized resident. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the quiet of our home. The refrigerator hummed. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily toward midnight. Outside, a car passed occasionally, its headlights sweeping across the living room walls. This was what peace felt like, I realized. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of certainty. For the first time in months, I knew exactly where I stood. My phone buzzed with a text message. Simone's name appeared on the screen, along with a message that made my jaw clench. Having amazing time. Don't wait up. Might be late. Love you. Love you. 3 words that had become meaningless through repetition, like a song played too many times on the radio. I deleted the message without responding and turned the phone face down on the table. The grandfather clock chimed midnight, then 1 a.m., then 2. I didn't go to bed. Instead, I sat in my kitchen, drinking water and thinking about foundations. About the moment when you realized that what you'd built your life on was never as solid as you'd believed. At 2:30, I heard a car door slam outside. Then footsteps on the front walk, quick and slightly unsteady. The sound of someone trying to be quiet and failing. The front door handle rattled, once, twice, then more insistently. I heard Simone's voice, muffled through the wood. What the hell? She tried her key. The lock beeped its denial. She tried again, and again the lock refused her entry. Then came the knocking, soft at first, then louder. Adrian? Adrian, the lock isn't working. Can you let me in? I remained seated at the kitchen table, perfectly still. Adrian, I know you're in there. The lights are on. My key won't work. Her voice carried a note of confusion, not yet alarm. She probably thought the lock was malfunctioning, that this was some technical glitch she could solve with persistence. The knocking became pounding. Adrian, this isn't funny. Let me in. Now she sounded angry. This was the Simone I'd grown accustomed to over the past year. Demanding, entitled, quick to blame others when things didn't go her way. The woman who'd charmed clients and colleagues but had gradually lost patience with her husband. I heard her heels clicking on the porch as she walked to the front window. She peered through the glass, and I knew she could see me sitting calmly at the kitchen table. Our eyes met across the distance. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she pointed toward the front door and mouthed the word, open. I shook my head slowly and took another sip of water. Her face transformed. Confusion became understanding. Understanding became fury. She marched back to the door and began pounding with both fists. You saw me! I know you saw me! Open this door right now! The pounding continued for 5 minutes, then 10. Eventually, it stopped. I heard her heels clicking again, heard her discover the suitcase I'd left for her. You've got to be kidding me, she said, loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. You packed my stuff? What is wrong with you? I finished my water and rinsed the glass in the sink. The pounding resumed, accompanied now by shouting that would definitely wake the neighbors. This is my house, too. You can't lock me out. I live here. Past tense would be more accurate, I thought, but didn't say it aloud. My phone buzzed repeatedly. calls, texts, voicemails. All from Simone, all increasingly frantic and angry. I let them accumulate unanswered. At 3:15 a.m., the pounding stopped. I heard her dragging the suitcase down the front steps, heard a car door slam, heard an engine start and drive away. The house fell silent again. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and lay down fully clothed on top of the covers. The space beside me felt vast and empty, but not lonely. Just clean. Like a construction site after the debris has been cleared away, ready for something new to be built. Sleep came easier than I'd expected. For the first time in months, I didn't lie awake wondering what Simone was thinking about, whether she was happy, whether I was doing enough to make our marriage work. I already knew the answers to those questions. I'd seen them on the dance floor at the Anchor, in the way she'd moved with that stranger, in the joy on her face when she'd given him her number. Some foundations can't be repaired. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is acknowledge the damage and start over. The sun rose at 6:47 a.m., painting golden rectangles across the hardwood floor of my bedroom. I'd been awake for 20 minutes, lying still and listening to the house settle around me. No coffee brewing downstairs, no shower running in the master bathroom, no morning news playing from the kitchen television. Just silence and the strange relief that comes with it. I showered, dressed in my usual work clothes, jeans, flannel shirt, steel-toed boots, and headed downstairs to start coffee. The kitchen looked exactly as I'd left it hours earlier, except for one thing: 17 missed calls and 23 text messages on my phone. The progression of Simone's texts told the story of her night better than any novel. 2:47 a.m. Let me in right now, or I'm calling the police. 3:02 a.m. This is insane. We need to talk like adults. 3:15 a.m. Fine, I'm going to Caitlin's. We'll discuss this tomorrow. 3:33 a.m. I can't believe you'd embarrass me like this. 4:12 a.m. You're being childish and cruel. 5:28 a.m. I know you're reading these. 6:15 a.m. We can work this out. Call me. I deleted them all without responding and poured my coffee. Black, no sugar. The way I'd always preferred it before Simone convinced me to try her elaborate cream and sweetener combinations. Funny how quickly you could return to your authentic self when nobody was watching. My phone rang. Simone's name appeared on the screen, accompanied by the photo I'd taken of her last Christmas morning, smiling, radiant, wearing the red silk robe I'd given her. That woman felt like a stranger now. I declined the call and turned off the phone entirely. Outside, October had painted the maple trees in brilliant reds and golds. The neighborhood was waking up, garage doors opening, cars backing out of driveways, the familiar rhythm of suburban morning routines. I'd always loved this time of day, before the world got complicated, when everything still felt possible. My work truck sat in the driveway, loaded with tools and materials for today's job. We were finishing a kitchen renovation for the Hendersons, a retired couple who'd hired my company to modernize their 1960s ranch house. Good people, fair clients, the kind of project that reminded me why I'd gotten into construction in the first place. I was backing out of the driveway when I noticed Earl Whitmore working in his garden next door. Earl was 73, a retired machinist who knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing his opinions. He'd lived on Maple Street for 40 years and considered himself the unofficial neighborhood watch. He waved me over with a dirt-stained glove. "Morning, Adrian. Hell of a commotion over at your place last night." "Sorry if we woke you, Earl." "Didn't wake me. I was already up reading. But that wife of yours sure was making a racket around 3 a.m. Everything okay?" Earl's eyes held the particular gleam of someone who already knew the answer but wanted to hear it confirmed. In a neighborhood like ours, domestic drama was premium entertainment. "Just a misunderstanding," I said. "Nothing that won't sort itself out?" Earl pulled a weed from his flower bed with more force than necessary. "Saw her leave with a suitcase. Looked pretty upset. I'm sure she'll be fine. Course, I also saw that fancy car that's been parking down the street some afternoons when you're at work. Black Charger with the tinted windows. Thought you might want to know?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What afternoons?" "Oh, 3, 4 times in the past month. Usually stays about an hour. None of my business, of course, but a man likes to know what's happening in his own neighborhood." Earl's weathered face was carefully neutral, but his message was clear. He'd seen something, suspected something, and now he was giving me the information to do with as I pleased. "Thanks for keeping an eye out, Earl." "That's what neighbors do. Drive safe now." I pulled away from the curb with my mind racing. A black Charger. The same car I'd seen in the Anchor's parking lot, the one the stranger had been leaning against when I'd walked past on my way to my truck. The timeline was becoming clearer, and it stretched back much further than last night's dance. The Henderson job site sat in the older part of town, where houses had character and problems in equal measure. I'd been working on their kitchen for 3 weeks, tearing out decades of amateur renovations and restoring the space to something functional and beautiful. Denny Kowalski, my lead carpenter, was already there when I arrived, measuring cabinet spaces with his usual meticulous attention to detail. Denny was 28, built like a linebacker, and possessed an intuitive understanding of how things fit together that made him invaluable on complex jobs. "Morning, boss. You look like someone who didn't sleep much." "Long night. How are we doing on the cabinet installation?" "Should have the uppers mounted by noon if the measurements work out. Mrs. Henderson stopped by earlier with coffee and donuts. She's excited to see the progress." I nodded and tried to focus on the work, but my mind kept drifting to Earl's revelation about the black charger, Simone's afternoon meetings that I'd never questioned, the gradual distance that had grown between us over the past few months. "Boss?" Denny was studying my face with concern. "You sure you're okay? You seem, I don't know, different today." Denny had worked for me for 2 years. He'd seen me handle difficult clients, impossible deadlines, and construction disasters that would have broken lesser men. If he was noticing a change in my demeanor, it must be significant. "Simone and I are having some problems," I said finally. "Sorry to hear that. Anything I can do?" "Actually, yes. You still have that friend who works in computer security? The one who helped us recover those files when our system got corrupted last year? Tommy Chen?" "Yeah, he's got his own IT consulting business now." "Why?" "I might need some help accessing information that's technically mine, but practically difficult to get to." Denny set down his measuring tape and gave me his full attention. "What kind of information?" "Phone records, social media activity, digital breadcrumbs that might help me understand what's been happening in my own marriage." "Ah!" Denny nodded slowly. "That kind of help?" "Yeah, Tommy can definitely assist with that, assuming everything's legal and above board." "It will be. I'm not looking to break any laws or hurt anyone. I just want to know the truth." "Truth's usually worth knowing, even when it hurts. Want me to give Tommy a call?" "Please, and Denny, I'd appreciate it if this conversation stayed between us." "Goes without saying, boss. We're a crew. We look out for each other." The morning passed in a blur of measurements, cuts, and installations. Physical labor had always been my therapy, the satisfaction of taking raw materials and shaping them into something useful and lasting. Today, the work felt especially important, a reminder that I could still build things that mattered. Mrs. Henderson appeared around 11 with fresh coffee and homemade cookies, her face glowing with excitement as she watched her dream kitchen take shape. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined," she said, running her hand along the new granite countertop. "Harold and I have been talking about this renovation for 10 years, but we never thought we'd actually do it." "What changed your mind?" I asked, though I was genuinely curious. "Harold's retirement, mainly. We realized we might have 20 or 30 good years left, and we wanted to spend them in a house that felt like home, not like a museum of someone else's decorating choices." 20 or 30 good years. The phrase stuck with me as I watched Mrs. Henderson examine every detail of our work. She and Harold had been married for 45 years, had raised 3 children in this house, had weathered whatever storms their marriage had faced and emerged stronger. What would that feel like, I wondered? To have a partner who stayed committed through decades of change, who chose to build something lasting instead of looking for excitement elsewhere. "Mr. Blackwood?" Mrs. Henderson was studying my face with the particular concern that grandmothers reserve for young people who look troubled. "Are you feeling all right? You seem a bit distant today." "Just tired, Mrs. Henderson. Long week." "Well, make sure you're taking care of yourself. A man needs proper rest and good food, especially when he's doing physical work all day. Are you eating regularly?" The question hit me unexpectedly. When had Simone last asked about my eating habits, my sleep, my general well-being? When had either of us last shown genuine concern for the other's daily welfare? "I'm managing fine, thank you." Well, if you ever need a home-cooked meal, Harold and I would be happy to have you over. We cook for 6 out of habit anyway." The kindness in her offer nearly undid me. These people, virtual strangers, were showing more care for my well-being than my wife had demonstrated in months. "That's very generous, Mrs. Henderson. I'll keep it in mind." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I'd turned it back on an hour earlier, and the missed calls and messages had resumed immediately. Simone was persistent. I'd give her that. But persistence in the wrong direction was just stubbornness. Denny approached as Mrs. Henderson headed back to the main house. "Tommy can meet us this evening if you're interested. He's got some software that might help with your research project." "Where?" His office is above that computer repair shop on Main Street. He said to come by around 7 after regular business hours. I nodded and returned to work, but my mind was already racing ahead to the evening. Whatever I discovered tonight would determine my next steps. Maybe I'd find innocent explanations for everything. The black charger, the afternoon visits, the distance between Simone and me. Or maybe I'd confirm what I already suspected, and then I'd have to decide what to do with that knowledge. Either way, the truth was waiting. And after 8 years of marriage built on assumptions and trust, I was finally ready to go looking for it. The afternoon sun slanted through the Hendersons' kitchen windows, illuminating dust motes and the careful work of men who took pride in precision. Tomorrow, we'd install the final fixtures and complete the project. The Hendersons would have their dream kitchen, and I'd have another satisfied client. But tonight, I'd begin the demolition of my own life, one digital breadcrumb at a time. Some foundations, I was learning, needed to be examined from the ground up before you could determine whether they were worth saving. Tommy Chen's office occupied the second floor of a narrow brick building on Main Street, sandwiched between a used bookstore and a coffee shop that closed at 4 p.m. The staircase creaked under my weight as I climbed toward a door marked Chen Digital Solutions in modest black lettering. Denny had arrived first and was waiting in the hallway, checking his phone. Tommy's just finishing up with another client. Should be ready in a few minutes. What did you tell him about what I need? Just that you're trying to recover information about your own accounts and devices. He doesn't need to know the personal details. Tommy's a professional. He helps people with data recovery and digital forensics all the time. The door opened, and a thin Asian man in his early 30s emerged, followed by an elderly woman clutching a laptop bag like it contained her life savings. "Remember, Mrs. Patterson," Tommy was saying, "always back up your photos to the cloud service I set up, and don't click on any email attachments unless you're absolutely certain they're legitimate. You're a lifesaver, Tommy. My grandchildren's pictures were the only thing I cared about on that computer." After Mrs. Patterson left, Tommy turned to us with a smile. "Ransomware," he explained. "Nasty stuff, but we managed to recover everything. You must be Adrian." Tommy Chen looked like every computer expert in every movie, thin, slightly rumpled, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. But his handshake was firm, and his office was impressively organized. Multiple monitors lined one wall, and servers hummed quietly in a climate-controlled cabinet. "Denny says you need help accessing your own digital information," Tommy said, settling behind his main workstation. "What kind of information are we talking about?" "Phone records, social media activity, maybe location data. My wife and I share several accounts, but she's changed some passwords recently. I want to understand what's been happening without having to confront her directly." Tommy nodded thoughtfully. "Marital issues. I see this a lot, unfortunately. The good news is that if you're on joint accounts, or if you're the primary account holder, there are legitimate ways to access most of what you're looking for." He pulled up several windows on his main monitor. "Let's start with the basics. Do you have access to your phone carrier's account management system?" "I'm the primary account holder. Both our phones are on my plan." "Perfect. That gives us call logs, text message metadata, and location data if location services are enabled. We can't see the content of text messages without her phone, but we can see when they were sent, received, and to what numbers." Tommy's fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, he'd logged into our carrier's website using my credentials and pulled up detailed usage reports. "Here's the interesting part," he said, pointing to a series of calls and texts. "This number appears frequently in your wife's activity over the past 6 weeks, usually during afternoon hours when I'm assuming you're at work." The number belonged to someone with a 508 area code, local. The frequency was damning, sometimes 3 or 4 calls per day, text message exchanges that lasted hours. "Can you identify who owns that number?" "Give me a minute." Tommy opened another application and ran a reverse lookup. "Brett Ridgely, age 36, works for Coastal Mortgage Solutions downtown, drives a 2019 Dodge Charger, black." My stomach clenched. The black Charger that Earl had seen parked near my house, the stranger from the Anchor. Now he had a name and a profession. "What else can you find about him?" Social media is usually the gold mine for this kind of research. Tommy's fingers danced across the keyboard again. "Brett Ridgely. Here we go. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Guy's not very privacy conscious." Brett's social media presence painted a predictable picture. Gym selfies, expensive restaurant photos, pictures of his car and his downtown apartment. He looked exactly like the type of man who would approach a married woman in a nightclub. Confident, self-absorbed, probably successful enough to be dangerous. "Can you check if my wife has been interacting with his accounts?" That's trickier without her login credentials, but Tommy paused, studying one of his screens. Actually, it looks like she's been tagged in several photos recently. Let me see. The photos made my hands clench into fists. Simone and Brett at lunch, sitting close together in a restaurant booth. Simone and Brett at what looked like a real estate industry mixer, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. Simone and Brett in his apartment, she wearing a dress I'd never seen before. The timestamps told the story. These photos spanned the past month, documenting a relationship that had clearly progressed far beyond professional networking. There's more, Tommy said quietly. Location data from her phone shows she's been spending significant time at his apartment address, usually on weekday afternoons. How significant? 2 to 3 hours at a time, multiple visits per week. The evidence was overwhelming, but I felt strangely calm. The uncertainty had been worse than the confirmation. Now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. Can you print all of this? The call logs, the photos, the location data? Absolutely, but Adrian? Tommy turned to face me directly. What are you planning to do with this information? I'm not sure yet, but I want to have all the facts before I make any decisions. Just remember that revenge is a dish best served legally. Whatever you're thinking about doing, make sure it won't come back to haunt you in court. Denny, who had been quietly observing the entire process, finally spoke up. Boss, maybe you should talk to a lawyer before you do anything else. Get some professional advice about your options. I will. But first, I want to understand the full scope of what's been happening. Tommy handed me a thick folder containing printouts of everything we'd discovered. This should give you a comprehensive picture. If you need anything else, more detailed analysis, additional research, just let me know. I paid Tommy for his services and walked back to my truck with Denny, the folder tucked under my arm like evidence in a criminal case, which, in a way, it was. You okay, boss? You're taking this pretty calmly. I suspected something was wrong. Now I know exactly what and with whom. In some ways, it's a relief. What's your next move? I need to think about that. But Denny, thanks for helping with this. It means a lot to have someone I can trust. Like I said, we're a crew. We look out for each other. I drove home through the darkening streets, past houses where families were settling in for the evening, dinners being prepared, homework being supervised, the comfortable routines of stable relationships. My own house stood dark and empty, a monument to the illusion I'd been living. Inside, I spread Tommy's printouts across the kitchen table and studied them like architectural blueprints. The pattern was clear. Simone and Brett's relationship had begun about 6 weeks ago, had quickly become intimate, and was still ongoing. The afternoon visits to his apartment coincided with times when I was reliably at job sites, when she knew I wouldn't come home unexpectedly. My phone buzzed with another text from Simone. We need to talk. This silent treatment is childish. I'm coming over tomorrow morning, whether you like it or not. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, Fine, 10 a.m. It was time to stop avoiding the confrontation. I had the evidence, I understood the situation, and I was ready to hear whatever explanation or justification she planned to offer. But first, I needed to decide what I wanted from that conversation. An apology, a confession, a chance to reconcile. As I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by proof of my wife's infidelity, I realized that what I wanted most was something she could no longer give me, the ability to trust her completely, the way I had for the first 7 years of our marriage. That trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired with words or promises. It was like a load-bearing wall that had been compromised. You could patch it, reinforce it, work around it, but the structural integrity would never be the same. Some damage was permanent. Some foundations, once cracked, could never again support the weight they were designed to carry. Tomorrow morning, Simone would come home expecting to negotiate, to explain, to somehow restore the status quo. But the status quo no longer existed. The man she'd married, the one who trusted blindly, who made excuses for her behavior, who prioritized harmony over honesty, had been replaced by someone harder and more clear-eyed, someone who now knew exactly what his marriage was worth and what it wasn't. I gathered up the printouts and locked them in my desk drawer. Tomorrow, we would have our conversation, and then I would begin the careful, methodical process of dismantling the life we'd built together, one decision at a time. After all, I was a demolition expert. I knew how to tear things down safely, efficiently, and completely. Simone arrived at exactly 10 a.m., her silver BMW pulling into the driveway with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment. I watched from the kitchen window as she sat in her car for a full minute, checking her makeup in the rearview mirror, preparing for what she probably assumed would be a negotiation. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, the blue dress that had always been my favorite, paired with the pearl earrings I'd given her for our 5th anniversary. Everything about her appearance was calculated to remind me of better times, to soften whatever
You cheated on me! You betrayed me! You destroyed our family!
Yes, I cheated! And you're the one to blame! You were never there for me! We're divorcing!
You get nothing! The house is mine! The money is mine! You'll live on the street! What?
Want to know who I cheated with? Your boss! He's a real man!
You're finished! I'll make sure you get nothing! You hear me? Nothing!
I don't need your money. I'm leaving you for him. He's twice the man you are. And you know what else?
anger she expected to face. I opened the front door before she could knock. Adrian. She stepped inside with the cautious confidence of someone entering potentially hostile territory. Thank you for agreeing to talk. We need to have this conversation. Might as well be now. She followed me to the living room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself 2 summers ago. Everything in this house carried the weight of our shared history. The couch we'd picked out together, the coffee table I'd built in my workshop, the wedding photos that now seemed like evidence from someone else's life. Simone settled onto the couch, crossing her legs and folding her hands in her lap. Her posture was perfect, professional, like she was meeting with a difficult client rather than her husband of 8 years. I know you're upset about last night, she began, but I think you're overreacting. Yes, I danced with someone at the club. Yes, we exchanged numbers, but it wasn't what you think. What do I think, Simone? You think I'm having an affair. You think I'm cheating on you, but you're wrong, Adrian. It was just networking. Brett works in mortgages, and he might be able to help some of my clients with financing. Brett. She'd used his name without me asking, confirming what I already knew. But she was still lying, still trying to manage the situation with a story that might have worked if I hadn't spent the previous evening collecting evidence. Networking, I repeated. Is that what you call it when you spend 3 hours at his apartment on Tuesday afternoons? Her face went pale. For the first time since she'd arrived, her composure cracked. I don't know what you're talking about. I stood up and walked to my desk, retrieving the folder Tommy had prepared. I know about Brett Ridgely. I know about the phone calls, the text messages, the visits to his apartment. I know about the restaurant lunches and the industry mixer where he had his hands all over you. I dropped the folder on the coffee table between us. Photographs spilled out. Images of her with Brett, call logs showing hundreds of communications, location data tracking her movements to his downtown apartment. Simone stared at the evidence like it was a venomous snake that had suddenly appeared in our living room. Where did you get these? Does it matter? The question is whether you're going to keep lying or finally tell me the truth. She picked up one of the photographs, the one of her and Brett in the restaurant, sitting close together, her hand resting on his arm. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held it. Adrian, I can explain. Then explain. Explain how networking requires you to spend hours at his apartment. Explain why you're tagged in photos on his social media. Explain why you gave him your number while I was getting you drinks. The last detail hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't known I'd witnessed that exchange, and the realization that I'd been watching, that I'd seen her betrayal in real time, seemed to break something inside her. You saw me at the club? I saw everything. I watched you dance with him. I watched you give him your number. I watched you laugh at his jokes while I stood 20 feet away, holding your drink like an idiot. Tears began forming in her eyes, but I felt no urge to comfort her. Those tears were for herself, not for the pain she'd caused me. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she said quietly. I never meant for you to find out this way. How was I supposed to find out, Simone? Were you planning to tell me eventually? Or were you just going to keep sneaking around indefinitely? I don't know. I wasn't thinking clearly. Brett made me feel different, exciting, like I was more than just a small-town real estate agent married to a contractor. The words stung because they revealed what she really thought of our life together. I wasn't enough for her. Our marriage wasn't enough. The home we'd built, the future we'd planned, none of it measured up to whatever excitement Brett Ridgely offered. How long has this been going on? 6 weeks, maybe 7. It started at a real estate conference in Boston. He was charming, successful, different from... She trailed off, realizing she was about to say something even more hurtful. Different from me. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Brett represents something I can't give you. Excitement, status, whatever it is you think you're missing in your life. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her carefully applied makeup. I love you, Adrian. I do. But I love him too. I know that sounds impossible, but it's true. You can't love both of us, Simone. Love isn't a timeshare. You can't split your commitment between two people and expect either relationship to mean anything. Why not? Why does it have to be all or nothing? Why can't we find a way to make this work? The question revealed how completely she'd lost touch with reality. She was suggesting some kind of arrangement where I would share my wife with another man, where I would accept being part of a triangle instead of half of a partnership. Because that's not marriage. That's not what I signed up for when I promised to be faithful to you. But you could try. For us, for what we've built together. I looked around the living room, at the furniture we'd chosen, the walls I'd painted, the life we'd created through years of shared decisions and compromises. All of it felt hollow now, like a movie set designed to look like a home but lacking any real foundation. What we built was based on trust and commitment. You've destroyed both of those things. There's nothing left to save. Don't say that. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. Counseling can't fix this, Simone. You made a choice. You chose excitement over stability, Brett over me, lies over honesty. Those choices have consequences. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where we'd planned to raise children, to grow old together, to build a life that mattered. Those dreams felt like relics from an archaeological dig, interesting artifacts from a civilization that no longer existed. What are you saying? Her voice was small, frightened. I'm saying our marriage is over. I'm saying you can't come back here. I'm saying you need to decide whether you want to be with Brett or alone, because being with me is no longer an option. You're divorcing me, just like that? Just like that. She stood up abruptly, her composure finally collapsing completely. You're being cruel. You're being vindictive. This isn't the man I married. The man you married trusted you completely. The man you married believed in our partnership. The man you married doesn't exist anymore. You eliminated him when you decided to betray everything we promised each other. I made a mistake. People make mistakes, Adrian. That doesn't mean you throw away 8 years of marriage. This wasn't a mistake. Mistakes are accidental. This was a series of deliberate choices made over months. You chose to meet Brett. You chose to give him your number. You chose to visit his apartment. You chose to lie to me every single day. She gathered up the photographs with shaking hands, as if removing the evidence could somehow undo what it revealed. I need time to think. I need to figure out what I want. You've had 7 weeks to figure that out. You chose Brett. Now you get to live with that choice. And if I choose you, if I end things with him? I turned back to face her, this woman I'd loved for 8 years, who had become a stranger in the space of a single evening. It's too late for that choice. Trust, once broken, can't be repaired with good intentions. I'll never again be able to look at you without wondering who you're really thinking about, where you're really going, whether you're telling me the truth. So that's it? You're giving up on us? I'm accepting reality. Our marriage ended the moment you decided Brett was more important than your vows. I'm just acknowledging what you already chose. She walked toward the front door, then stopped and turned back. I hope you'll regret this someday. I hope you'll realize that you threw away something good because you couldn't forgive one mistake. The only thing I regret is not seeing this coming sooner. The only thing I regret is trusting you long after you'd stopped deserving it. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and I was alone again in the house that was finally completely mine. Outside, her BMW sat in the driveway for another 10 minutes while she made phone calls, probably to Brett, possibly to Caitlin, certainly to someone who would tell her that I was being unreasonable, that marriages could survive infidelity, that I would come around eventually. But I wouldn't come around. Some lines, once crossed, redefined the entire landscape. Some betrayals changed not just what you knew about a person, but who you were willing to be in relationship to them. When her car finally pulled away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace, not happiness, that would come later, if at all, but the deep structural peace that comes from finally accepting the truth about your situation. My marriage was over, my wife was gone, my future was uncertain, and for the first time in years, that felt like progress. 3 days passed before I realized I was humming while I worked. The Henderson kitchen project was complete, and we'd moved on to a bathroom renovation for the Kowalskis. No relation to my employee Denny, just one of those coincidences that made our small city feel even smaller. The work felt different now, cleaner. Without the constant background worry about Simone's mood, her schedule, her needs, I could focus completely on the task at hand. My crew had noticed the change, too. Boss seems lighter these days, I overheard Jake telling Denny during our lunch break. More like his old self. My old self. I'd forgotten that version of Adrian Blackwood existed, the man who took genuine pleasure in transforming spaces, who could lose himself in the satisfaction of precise measurements and perfect fits. Marriage to Simone had gradually worn away at that contentment, replacing it with a constant low-level anxiety about whether I was doing enough, being enough, providing enough. Now, with that pressure removed, I remembered why I'd chosen this profession in the first place. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We should talk. This is Brett." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Whatever Brett Ridgely wanted to discuss, I wasn't interested. He'd won the prize he'd been pursuing. He could deal with the consequences without my input. The phone buzzed again. "Simone told me what happened. I think there's been a misunderstanding." This time I responded, "No misunderstanding. Congratulations on your new relationship." "It's not like that. We're just friends." I almost laughed. Even now, faced with the collapse of my marriage, they were still lying, still trying to manage the narrative, control the damage, minimize their responsibility. "Tell that to someone who believes you." I typed back, then blocked his number entirely. That evening, I stopped by Murphy's Tavern, a working-class bar 3 blocks from my house where contractors, plumbers, and electricians gathered to complain about difficult clients and celebrate completed projects. I hadn't been there in months. Simone had considered it beneath her social aspirations, but tonight I craved the company of people who understood the value of honest work. Big Mike Murphy stood behind the bar, polishing glasses with the methodical care of someone who took pride in details. Mike was 62, built like a retired linebacker, and had been serving drinks to the neighborhood for 25 years. He knew everyone's story and kept their secrets with professional discretion. "Adrian Blackwood, haven't seen you in a while. The usual?" "Whiskey neat. Make it a double." Mike poured the drink and slid it across the bar. "Rough day?" "Rough week. Rough month, actually." "Want to talk about it?" I considered the offer. Mike had probably heard every variation of human drama that existed. Cheating spouses, financial troubles, family conflicts, professional disasters. My story wasn't unique, just personally devastating. "My wife's been having an affair. I found out, confronted her, ended the marriage. Now I'm trying to figure out what comes next." Mike nodded thoughtfully. "How long were you married?" 8 years. "Kids?" "No. We kept saying we'd start a family someday, but someday never came." "Probably for the best, given the circumstances. Kids make these situations a lot more complicated." I sipped my whiskey and watched the other patrons, men and women who worked with their hands, who built things and fixed things and kept the world functioning. Honest people living honest lives, most of them. "Can I ask you something, Mike? In your experience, do marriages survive infidelity? Can people really get past that kind of betrayal?" Mike set down his glass and leaned against the bar. "Some do. Depends on the people involved, the circumstances, whether both parties are willing to do the work required to rebuild trust." "And in your opinion, is it worth the effort?" "That's a question only you can answer. But I will say this. I've seen couples who worked through infidelity and came out stronger, and I've seen couples who tried to reconcile and just prolonged the misery for years. What made the difference? Honesty. Complete, brutal honesty from both people about what went wrong, why it happened, and what they were willing to do differently going forward. If either person holds back, makes excuses, or tries to minimize their role in the problem, the reconciliation fails. I thought about Simone's performance 3 days ago. The careful outfit, the rehearsed explanations, the suggestion that we could somehow make a triangle work. Even when confronted with overwhelming evidence, she'd been calculating, strategic, unwilling to fully acknowledge the scope of her betrayal. She wanted to keep both relationships going, I said. Thought we could find some kind of arrangement where she didn't have to choose. Mike whistled low. "That's not remorse, Adrian. That's entitlement. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too, with you footing the bill for the privilege." That's what I thought. But part of me wonders if I gave up too easily, if I should have tried harder to save the marriage. "Let me ask you this. If you took her back tomorrow, if she ended things with this other guy and promised to be faithful, would you trust her?" The question hit me like a physical blow because the answer was immediate and absolute. No, I'd never trust her again. Then you have your answer. Marriage without trust isn't marriage. It's just two people sharing expenses while living separate lives. I finished my whiskey and ordered another. The alcohol was smoothing the sharp edges of my emotions, making the pain more manageable without eliminating it entirely. "The hardest part," I said, "is that I still love her. Even knowing what she did, even seeing the evidence, Part of me still loves the woman I thought she was. That's normal. Grief isn't just for when people pass away. It's for when relationships end, when the future you planned disappears, when you have to let go of who you thought someone was. How long does it take? The grief, I mean? Depends on the person, but I can tell you this. It gets easier when you stop fighting it and start accepting it. The sooner you acknowledge that your marriage is truly over, the sooner you can begin building whatever comes next. I spent another hour at Murphy's, listening to the comfortable chatter of people who worked hard and played honestly. When I finally headed home, I felt something approaching clarity about my situation. Simone had made her choice. I'd made mine. Now we would both live with the consequences. But as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. The black Dodge Charger parked across the street, engine running, windows tinted dark enough to hide the occupants. Brett Ridgely had decided that blocking his number wasn't sufficient to end our communication. I parked in my garage and entered the house through the side door, keeping the lights off as I moved to the front window. The Charger sat there for another 20 minutes before finally driving away, but the message was clear. This situation wasn't over. Brett wanted a confrontation. Maybe Simone had convinced him that I was the obstacle to their happiness, that if he could just talk to me, reason with me, explain their side of the story, I might step aside gracefully. Or maybe he was trying to intimidate me, to make me understand that he wasn't afraid of a confrontation. Either way, he'd made a mistake. I'd spent my entire adult life working with tools and materials that could cause serious damage if mishandled. I understood leverage, pressure points, and the precise application of force. More importantly, I had friends who shared that knowledge and wouldn't hesitate to help if the situation escalated. Brett Ridgely was about to learn that some men were harder to intimidate than others. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Denny. Might need backup soon. Are you available if things get complicated? His response came immediately. Always. What kind of complicated? The kind where my wife's boyfriend thinks he can pressure me into accepting their relationship. Address? I sent him my location and settled in to wait. If Brett wanted to escalate this situation beyond text messages and late-night surveillance, he would discover that I wasn't the passive victim he'd apparently expected. Some foundations, when attacked, crumbled easily. Others were built to withstand significant pressure. Brett was about to find out which kind of man he'd chosen to antagonize. The Charger returned at 2:15 a.m., parking in the same spot across the street with its engine idling. This time, I was ready. I'd spent the evening preparing, changing into dark clothes, positioning myself at the upstairs window with a clear view of the street, keeping my phone charged and within reach. Denny had arrived at midnight and was stationed in my garage with a direct view of the driveway. Movement, I texted him as the Charger's door opened. Brett Ridgely emerged from the driver's seat, and even in the dim streetlight, his body language radiated aggressive confidence. He was dressed in dark jeans and a black jacket, moving with the swagger of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. He walked directly to my front door and began pounding with his fist. Adrian, I know you're in there. We need to talk, man to man. I remained at the upstairs window, watching. Let him make the first move, establish his intentions, reveal the extent of his stupidity. Come on, Adrian, don't be a coward. Face me like a man. The insult was predictable. Toxic Masculinity 101, designed to provoke me into opening the door and engaging on his terms. But I'd learned patience from years of construction work, where rushing led to mistakes and mistakes led to injuries. Brett pounded on the door for another minute, then walked around to the side of the house, testing windows, looking for another way to get my attention. When he reached the backyard, I lost sight of him. My phone buzzed with a text from Denny. He's trying the back door now. Want me to introduce myself? Not yet. Let's see how far he's willing to take this. The pounding resumed, this time on the rear sliding door. Brett's voice carried through the glass. I'm not leaving until we talk. Simone deserves better than this silent treatment. Simone deserves better. The phrase revealed everything about Brett's mindset. He saw himself as her champion, her rescuer from a marriage to an inadequate husband. In his version of events, I was the villain keeping two lovers apart through stubborn pride. The pounding stopped. For several minutes, the night was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic on the main road. Then I heard a sound that made my jaw clench, the scrape of metal against glass. He was trying to force the lock on the sliding door. That crossed the line from harassment to attempted breaking and entering. I texted Denny. He's trying to break in. Time to say hello. I made my way downstairs and positioned myself near the front door, ready to move quickly in any direction. Through the back window, I could see Brett working at the door lock with what looked like a screwdriver. his movements becoming more frustrated as the mechanism resisted his amateur efforts. The garage door opened with a mechanical rumble that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Brett froze, screwdriver still in hand, as Denny emerged into the backyard like a nightmare made flesh. At 6'4" and 240 pounds of muscle earned through years of physical labor, Denny Kowalski was an intimidating presence even in daylight. At 2:30 a.m., dressed in black and moving with predatory silence, he looked like something that belonged in a horror movie. "Evening," Denny said conversationally. "Beautiful night for a walk, don't you think?" Brett spun around, the screwdriver falling from his hand and clattering on the concrete patio. In the dim light, his face showed the exact moment when confident aggression transformed into genuine fear. What are you doing here?" "I'm a friend of the homeowner. He mentioned he was having some trouble with trespassers, so I thought I'd keep an eye on the place." Denny stepped closer, his voice remaining friendly even as his physical presence became more menacing. "You wouldn't happen to be one of those trespassers, would you?" "I just want to talk to Adrian. This is between him and me." "Funny thing about that. Adrian doesn't want to talk to you. He's made that pretty clear by not answering your calls, not responding to your texts, and not opening his door when you pound on it like some kind of maniac." Brett tried to step backward and bumped into the sliding door. The trapped animal look in his eyes was almost comical. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I just think there's been a misunderstanding about my relationship with Simone." "No misunderstanding," Denny replied. "You're sleeping with another man's wife. He found out. He ended his marriage. Now you're harassing him at his own home in the middle of the night. That about sum it up? It's not that simple. Actually, it's exactly that simple." Denny moved closer again, forcing Brett to press himself against the glass door. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk back to your fancy car, drive away, and never come back to this address. You're not going to call Adrian, text Adrian, or contact Adrian in any way. You're going to disappear from his life completely." "And if I don't?" Denny smiled, and even from inside the house, I could see it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Then my friends and I will have to explain the situation to you in terms you'll understand better. And trust me, Brett, you don't want that conversation." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm educating you about the natural consequences of your choices. You decided to pursue a married woman. You decided to destroy someone else's marriage. You decided to show up at his house in the middle of the night and try to break in. Those choices have created a situation where reasonable people might feel compelled to protect their friend from further harassment." Brett's confidence had completely evaporated. He looked like what he was, a mortgage broker who spent his free time at the gym, completely out of his depth when faced with men who worked with dangerous tools and heavy machinery for a living. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," Denny replied. "It's over because you're going to make the smart choice and walk away, because you're going to realize that Simone isn't worth getting hurt over, because you're going to understand that some men fight back when you threaten their homes." Brett edged along the sliding door toward the corner of the house, keeping his eyes on Denny the entire time. When he reached the gate to the front yard, he broke into a run. I watched from the front window as he sprinted to his charger, fumbled with his keys, and drove away with the desperation of someone fleeing a crime scene. His tires squealed as he accelerated down the street, and I doubted he'd be back. Denny appeared at my front door a few minutes later, grinning like he'd just finished an enjoyable workout. "That was fun," he said. "Guy's a complete amateur. All flash, no substance." "Think he'll stay away?" "Guys like that are all about image and comfort. He's not going to risk getting his pretty face damaged over someone else's wife. He'll probably convince himself that Simone isn't worth the trouble." We sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and discussing the evening's events. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me feeling strangely empty. Brett's visit had been a distraction from the real issue, the collapse of my marriage and the need to rebuild my life from scratch. "You know," Denny said, "this might actually work out in your favor." "How do you figure?" "Think about it. Brett just got a reality check about what pursuing Simone is going to cost him. He thought he was getting a fun affair with a married woman, no strings attached. Now he's dealing with angry husbands, midnight confrontations, and the possibility of real consequences for his actions. You think he'll dump her? I think he'll start questioning whether she's worth the drama, and when that happens, Simone's going to discover that her exciting new romance isn't as exciting as she thought." The idea had a certain poetic justice to it. Simone had blown up our marriage for the thrill of being with Brett, convinced that he represented everything I couldn't provide. If Brett decided the situation was too complicated and walked away, she'd be left with nothing. No husband, no lover, no future she'd planned for. "Either way," I said, "it's not my problem anymore." "Exactly. You're free to build whatever kind of life you want, with whoever you want, whenever you're ready. That's worth celebrating. After Denny left, I stood in my kitchen and looked around at the space that was finally completely mine. No more walking on eggshells around Simone's moods. No more wondering where she was or who she was with. No more pretending that our marriage was something it wasn't. The silence felt like freedom. Outside, dawn was beginning to touch the horizon with pale gold light. A new day was starting, and for the first time in months, I was looking forward to seeing what it would bring. Some demolitions were necessary before new construction could begin. Some foundations had to be completely removed before you could build something stronger in their place. My marriage was gone, but my life was just beginning. 6 months later, I was installing custom cabinets in Sarah Mitchell's kitchen when she asked the question I'd been expecting for weeks. "Adrian, would you like to have dinner with me sometime, somewhere that doesn't involve sawdust and power tools?" Sarah was a divorced teacher, 42 years old, with kind eyes and a laugh that reminded me why I'd once enjoyed making people smile. She'd hired my company to renovate her entire house after her own marriage ended, and we'd developed an easy friendship based on shared experience and mutual respect. I set down my drill and looked at her directly. "I'd like that very much." "Good," because I was running out of subtle ways to ask. We both laughed, and I realized how natural it felt. This conversation, this possibility, this sense that my life was moving forward instead of standing still. The past 6 months had been a masterclass in rebuilding. The divorce from Simone had been finalized 3 weeks ago, handled by lawyers with the cold efficiency that legal dissolution required. She'd kept the BMW and half our savings. I'd kept the house, the business, and my self-respect. Denny had been right about Brett. Within a month of our midnight encounter, he'd apparently decided that Simone came with too much baggage and too many complications. She'd shown up at my office once, tearful and desperate, asking if we could try again now that Brett was out of the picture. I'd told her the same thing I'd told her 6 months earlier. Trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired with good intentions. She was living in a downtown apartment now, working for a different real estate company, trying to rebuild her reputation and her client base. I heard updates occasionally through the neighborhood gossip network, but her life no longer intersected with mine in any meaningful way. "So," Sarah said, "Friday night? There's a new Italian place downtown that's supposed to be excellent." Friday night sounds perfect. As I packed up my tools at the end of the day, I reflected on how much had changed since that night at the Anchor. The man who'd watched his wife dance with a stranger felt like someone from a previous lifetime, naive, trusting, willing to accept surface appearances instead of demanding deeper truths. The man I'd become was more cautious, but also more confident, more selective, but also more open to genuine connection. I'd learned the difference between love and habit, between commitment and convenience, between building something lasting and simply maintaining something familiar. My phone buzzed with a text from Denny. "Drinks at Murphy's tonight. Jake's buying the first round to celebrate finishing the Morrison job ahead of schedule." "Can't tonight. Have plans." "Hot date?" "Something like that." "About time, boss." "About damn time." I drove home through streets that felt completely different than they had 6 months ago. The same houses, the same trees, the same familiar landmarks. But now they represented possibility instead of routine, freedom instead of obligation. Earl Whitmore was working in his garden when I pulled into my driveway. He waved me over with the enthusiasm of someone who had news to share. "Adrian, did you hear about that Ridgely fellow? The one with the black car?" "What about him?" "Got himself arrested last week. Apparently he was running some kind of mortgage fraud scheme, inflating property values, falsifying income documents, skimming money from loan processing fees. The FBI raided his office and froze all his accounts." I felt a moment of grim satisfaction. Brett's character had finally caught up with him in ways that had nothing to do with his affair with Simone. "Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy," I said. "Of course, your ex-wife's name came up in some of the paperwork. Seems she was steering clients to him in exchange for kickbacks on the mortgage fees. Nothing criminal on her part, apparently, but it's not going to help her reputation in the real estate business." The news should have made me angry. Simone had been profiting from questionable business practices while married to me, potentially exposing both of us to legal liability. Instead, I felt only a distant sense of vindication. Her poor judgment hadn't been limited to her choice of lovers. "Thanks for the update, Earl." Course. Always good to know what kind of people you're dealing with. You're better off without that whole mess." Inside my house, I showered and changed clothes, preparing for an evening with friends who valued honesty and loyalty.